Hi and welcome to Made by E. Today I'm going to show you how to take this Target dress and turn it into a haute couture style dress. This is a pretty inexpensive way to create a fun dress. This is the dress that I got from Target. It's called Women's Sleeveless One Shoulder Dress by A New Day. It was only $25 and I'm wearing a size small. The dress is a little bit see-through, but that was okay since I'm going to be covering it with ruffles. Before committing to buying too much material, I went to Joann Fabrics and I got two different types of tulle and made a few test pieces. Joann Fabrics will actually let you buy as little as 4-inch strips, so that's what I did for these two types of tulles. The first test piece that I made was with that traditional type of tulle. It was a little bit more coarse, but it did have that fluffy look that I like. I just didn't like that coarse feeling. I feel like wearing it as a dress just wouldn't be very comfortable. The second tulle had a softer look and a softer feel. I really liked it, but it was a little bit too droopy. So I did this thing where I sewed a layer of the stiffer tulle between the two layers of the softer tulle, which I liked just because it gave it a little bit more definition. So this is the method that I'm going to try to use for the dress. Overall, I didn't really like these colors. I thought they were a little bit too white. So I went to the fabric store and I got a different shade of ivory that was a little bit more blush-like in the softer tulle. So keeping the same method, I'm going to go ahead and use this tulle and just incorporate the stiffer tulle between the softer new tulle. I'm going to start by going over the materials that I'll be using. My dress from Target, a bunch of pins, some sort of ruler, an invisible ink pen, a good pair of sharp scissors, and then 7 yards of the softer tulle and 3 yards of your stiffer tulle. Make sure you double check the width of my fabric in the description below. Different fabrics may have different widths, so you may need to buy more or less of your tulle. And you'll need a sewing machine as well, unless you want to hand stitch everything. Started by cutting my softer tulle into 4-inch strips. I have one of those handy mats with measurements on it, so I just use that for guidance. It was a lot of cutting, but just try to keep your strips as neat and straight as possible. This is where your sharp scissors will really come in handy. And for the stiffer tulle, I just cut them into 3-inch strips since they're going to be laying between the softer tulle. Now that I have all of my tulle cut into strips, I'm going to go ahead and assemble everything together in my sewing machine. So I'm going to take 2 strips from the soft pile, 1 strip from the stiffer pile, and sandwich them together. So here's my softer tulle, and I'm just going to go ahead and lay the stiffer tulle on top of that. And then I'm going to take another soft piece and just sandwich that right on top. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew across the top on the highest tension on my sewing machine. I want to show you the settings on my machine. So I'm going to be using a straight stitch, but on the largest setting. And then I'm just going to go ahead and move my tension all the way over as far as I can, which will be on 9. So right before I started sewing my strips, I had an idea, and so I pivoted just a tiny little bit. I decided to overlap the middle layer a bit here and there, just to give my ruffles a little bit more definition. So you'll see me stopping every few inches to overlap the middle. I just gather it and just kind of fold it over, and then I put the top layer back and then just continue to sew. And then you'll see, because I made the tension thread on 9, the ruffles on the other end of the machine are coming out ruffled. Whew, that took a while, but so many ruffles. So I knew that I wanted my ruffles to go in various directions on my dress, so I just drew an outline. And then I drew where I wanted to actually sew the ruffles. So I knew that I wanted to have sort of a cascading look on the front, on the lower tier. Then I knew I kind of wanted maybe some sort of a more spiral look on the chest area. And maybe just some back and forth weaving here. And then I just kind of added lines here and there until I filled up most of the space on where I wanted my ruffles to be on the dress. For the next part, I'm going to use my disappearing invisible ink pen, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw the lines on the actual dress from the pattern that I just made. This part doesn't need to be perfect. The lines are just really more of a guide for you. After I was done filming, I realized that it was difficult to see some of my lines, but I promise I am drawing them on the actual dress. Afterwards, I pinned all the ruffles where I drew the lines. I just wanted to get a sense of what the finished product would look like. I didn't cut any of the long ruffle trim yet, but what I did was I just kind of weaved it back and forth just so I can get like a final idea of the finished product. You'll probably need more pins than you had anticipated. I actually had to go and buy some more in the middle of this. This is what it looked like after I was done pinning everything. I was pretty happy with the way it turned out, so I think I am going to go ahead and sew these where they are. You may have noticed some missing ruffles towards the bottom of the dress. This is just because I was testing it out and I got a little lazy towards the end. And this is basically me undoing all of my hard work. I'm just taking out all the pins so that I can go ahead and sew each of the layer of ruffles one at a time. Just a reminder that before you start pinning and sewing anything, I would go ahead and make sure that your zipper is open so that you don't accidentally sew across the zipper and sew it shut. And then also make sure that when you are sewing along the top openings of the head and the arm area, that you are gonna sew your trim with the ruffle side up so that you can't see any of the stitching along the edges. Back at the sewing machine, I'm going to go ahead and adjust my tension since I had it all the way on 9 when I was making the trim. And then I'm also going to go ahead and just adjust where my needle needs to be and turn my stitch size to a slightly smaller stitch. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew along where I pinned all of my ruffles. So at this point, I'm just going to go back and forth, pinning, sewing, pinning, sewing. Just make sure that when you do sew, you're watching the bottom of the dress. There were a couple of times where I accidentally stitched one side of the dress to the other side, and then I had to rip everything out with the seam ripper. I always manage to make that mistake, and it's so frustrating. I also want to point out that every time I had to cut the trim or I got to the edge of the dress, I folded the ruffle over so that the transition to the next ruffle wouldn't look so blunt. You can kind of see how I did it along this zipper area and anywhere else along the dress where I had to cut the trim. You'll see that I just folded it over and just sewed it down. We are almost done. So for the last step, I'm just going to take a regular needle and thread. And I'm just going to turn the dress upside down so you're looking at the top part. This is where your head and your arm is going to stick out of those holes. And I'm just going to create some anchor points along the edge. So if you look here, the ruffle is kind of sticking straight up. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hand stitch a small anchor point and tie it off. And I'm just going to do that every 3 inches or so all the way along that big opening, just so that the ruffles will kind of lay a bit nicer. And that's pretty much it. I wore this when I went to visit Chicago and visited the Bean in Millennium Park. I got so many compliments along the way, and I love the way that it made me feel. Let me know if you'll attempt to make your own ruffled dress.